Hello and welcome to Press TV News Analysis. I'm Kavit Hathaway. In this edition of the News Analysis, we'll be looking at Hamas, which celebrated its 23rd anniversary, and why it continues to enjoy massive support in spite of Israel's crippling siege on the Gaza Strip. But these days, the fate of Palestinians in general cannot be discussed without mentioning the failed Middle East talks, which has morphed into, as Hamas's prime minister stated, quote, settlement freeze for peace.
Palestinian resistance movement Hamas was founded 23 years ago with the purpose of liberating Palestine from the Israeli occupation. At the time, the Palestinian people had risen against Israel's occupation of their territories. Over 6 decades after the emergence of Israel and the ensuing occupation of Palestinian land, Israel has expelled millions of Palestinians from their homes. By the end of the 1967 war between Israel and Arabs, Israel had occupied much of the Palestinian land. The process of expansion continued with settlement buildings and demolition of Palestinian homes. Now the Palestinian territories comprise parts of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. In parliamentary elections of 2006, Hamas won a decisive majority in parliament, defeating the Palestinian Liberation Organization, PLO. However, its officials were later ousted from government positions in the West Bank. Hamas took control of the Gaza Strip, while Israel imposed a crippling blockade on the region. Over the past 4 years, 1.5 million Gazans have been economically strangled with no power over their daily lives. Since the 1970s, there have been some efforts to resolve the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians through negotiations, but none has been conclusive, with Israel refusing to compromise. The latest of such negotiations, sponsored by the United States, was held in the absence of Hamas in September 2010. The talks failed after a few weeks, following Israel's refusal to renew a partial freeze on its settlement activities in the West Bank. Even a sizable package of incentives offered by Washington failed to persuade Israel to hold settlement buildings for just 90 days. Following the failure of direct talks, the Palestinian Authority has been seeking international recognition of a Palestinian state based on the 1967 borders. The United Nations says more than 100 states around the world recognize Palestine. Brazil and Argentina are the latest countries to have joined the growing trend. Hamas believes the Palestinian Authority shouldn't have engaged in talks with Tel Aviv, as it refuses to address core issues on the dispute.
The Zionist enemy has a clear stance. The Zionist enemy says we reject freezing of settlement activity. We reject putting down the separation wall. We reject dividing Jerusalem al-Quds. We reject the return of refugees. We reject people returning. We want Judaization of the state. No, no, no. That's how the Israelis are talking.
The Palestinian Authority is now seeking ways to get the negotiations back on track and has called for an urgent meeting of the Middle East Quartet to discuss the issue. Hamas, however, believes that the Israeli occupation should be confronted through resistance. It remains to be seen which path best serves the interests of the Palestinian people.
Joining us to discuss this more, we have lecturer and writer Norman Finkelstein joining us from New York. We also have author and Middle East affairs expert Saeb Shaath joining us from Belfast. Gentlemen, thank you both. I'm going to start with Norman Finkelstein. It seems Hamas enjoys massive popularity today after the 33-day Israel war, and while the Gaza Strip has been under Israel's siege for almost 4 years. Why is that?
Well, I'm not sure if it's accurate to say that Hamas enjoys massive support. My understanding, judging from the polls, is that if there were elections held now, Hamas would probably lose in Gaza and probably win in the West Bank. It's not surprising that Hamas's support would have diminished. That was the intention of the sanctions that were imposed by the United States and Israel after Hamas won the 2006 elections. When the elections were over, the former U.S. President Jimmy Carter, he said they were completely honest and fair. And so the United States and Israel imposed these brutal economic sanctions on the people of Gaza in order to dissuade them from supporting their elected leadership. And it's not surprising, because it's happened elsewhere in the world, that at some point people begin to doubt the wisdom of electing governments which are hostile to the United States and Israel because of the penalties and the sanctions that are imposed. The fact of the matter is that Hamas was never given a chance to govern in the occupied Palestinian territories, so it's impossible to say how successful or unsuccessful their government would have been. From the moment they were elected into power, the United States and Israel were determined that the Palestinian people would be punished for electing the government, and that enough pressure would be applied on the people that ultimately they would reject their elected government.
Saeb Shaath, do you agree with the assessment that Normal Finkelstein just made?
I would like to say the Palestinian people usually they support their own defenders. The resistance, Hamas was displayed itself as a resistance for the Palestinian people, and we're fighting occupation, and that is the key. As long as Hamas resists the occupation, resists the American imperialist project in the area, and stand firmly against Israel and this Zionist project in the Middle East with the United States of America, Hamas will keep its support. Of course, Hamas lost some support of Gaza because of the inexperience of managing and handling state affairs. That is, I agree with that point of view, but they didn't lose that much support because in their political program is still engaged in resistance and in fighting the Zionists. Myself, I was a couple of weeks ago in Gaza in a speech I made there beside Haniya. I told the Prime Minister in front of everybody, we will support any Palestinian reconciliations on one condition, if it's keep supporting the resistance agenda, and that is the key. The resistance is protecting the people. The resistance is putting a stop for the Israelis and the imperialist Americans project and making them pay a heavy price. Of course, Gaza is under massive siege and sanctions, and that as well there is an Arabic hands in that because they are scared of the model which Hamas presented in Gaza to be exported and implemented somewhere else in the Middle East. That's another dimension which will of course jeopardize the imperialist design in the Middle East.
Normal Finkelstein, how do we go from the 1948 boundaries to a settlement freeze for peace?
Well, we have to be clear about what are the options on the international agenda. There is now a consensus in the international community supporting a two-state settlement on the June 1967 border. If you look, for example, at the resolution that was just passed in the United Nations General Assembly last week, there's an annual resolution. It's called Peaceful Settlement of the Palestine Question. It comes up every year for the past 15 years or so. And the terms for settling the conflict are laid out very clearly in the resolution: a two-state settlement on the June 67 border and a just resolution of the refugee question. The vote in the General Assembly this past year, namely 2 weeks ago, the vote was 165-7. The whole world on one side, and on the other side, Australia, the United States, Israel, Nauru, Palau, Micronesia, and the Marshall Islands. And that's been consistently the case for, as I say, the past 15 years. Iran, for example, has voted with the majority for the two-state settlement. If you look at the 2002 Arab Peace Initiative, again it calls for a two-state settlement on the June 67 border. It was supported by all 22 Arab states, and that initiative has been reiterated annually, most recently in 2009, I think in Doha. And then there was the Organization of the Islamic Conference, 57 Muslim nations, including Iran, which support the Arab Peace Initiative. So there's a consensus that includes virtually the whole of humanity except the United States and Israel, and it calls for that two-state settlement. As to how you implement it, I don't think there's a great deal of difficulty. The challenge now is to impose sanctions or penalties on the recalcitrant party. And the recalcitrant party, the party which refuses to go along with international law, refuses to go along with the international consensus, is plainly Israel. Hamas, for example, has repeatedly made statements, including just about a week ago, in which it said, of course, it's willing to settle in the June 67 border and a just resolution of the refugee question. So the only real obstacle to resolving the conflict is Israel backed by the United States.
Saeb Shaath, I want to cite a piece of information here. 43 Palestinians killed, 18 Gaza children abducted, and 298 building housing 710 families demolished. And you would think this is maybe from the past month or even the past year, but that was back in May 2004. So what has changed? Why hasn't there been any improvements at all when we even talk beyond that up to the present moment?
I'll say, following up what Mr. Finkelstein was saying, if we look at the picture after as we said, the humanity, all of humanity supported that. They were talking about the Resolution 181, the basis of two-state solution. From there came from United Nations State 181, and then a Resolution 194, which give the Palestinian the right to return. And we follow from there. The PLO adopted the two-state solution and just put down its secular democratic one-state solution. And we moved on to Arab-Egyptian agreement, Camp David, and the Jordanians, and then the Oslo agreement. And the continuous settlement under the Oslo agreement went berserk in the West Bank. They grabbed most of the land. And now we've seen even the incentive, which is Obama administration put to the Israelis to tell them to freeze a 3-month settlement, and they refuse. You wonder why they refuse a squadron of F-35 and a lot of money and a lot of incentive. For 2 reasons I see that. First of all, they don't see the United States of America's support to them have to be conditional. They are partners in a crime in here. Israel is carrying on the plans and the objectives of the imperialist project in the Middle East. So there is no condition should be put to support of Israel. And that's one of the things since the existence of Israel. They don't want to change that. The other point is they don't want to stop freezing settlements right now so they can go and straight away move and talk about the borders. Israel doesn't want that. They want to Judaize Jerusalem. The whole of Jerusalem have to be Jewish now. They want to take as much as they can land from the West Bank, so they deny any chance of ever existing two-state solution. Now we are at the precise moment in time. There is no hope, no chance for creating these two-state solutions as everyone. The only way forward is the right of the Palestinians to return, and then from there, this is the bulk of the problem. The bulk of the problem is not border or land or city. There is 8 million Palestinian refugees have the right to return home. They want to call any state whatever name they wanted, but those people guaranteed the right by humanity, by universal human rights, by United Nations, by any religious or philosophical or atheist even sort of values, their rights to return home. This is the problem. From here we can talk. The Palestinians right now, they found themselves in a position which is Obama's administration say they cannot even impose 30 days of freeze on settlements. How are they going to achieve a whole just solution for two-state solution? This is a joke, and they are playing with the Palestinians, and we know it. The only solution and resolution to this is resistance, to make them pay the price for the occupation. That is not negotiation for the sake of negotiations, as the heads of the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah say. They actually serve a Zionist agenda, them guys in Ramallah there. The only way is to encourage resistance, to make the Israelis and the imperialist program in the Middle East pay heavily, make the occupation costing them very much. They cannot afford it.
I'm going to pick on one thing that you placed some emphasis on, Normal Finkelstein and Saeb Shaath, was on the right of return. Could I have your reaction to that?
Well, there are two separate issues with the right of return. There's the legal issue, and the major human rights organizations in the world, for example, Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, in 2000 and 2001, at the time of the Camp David talks, the Clinton parameters, and then the Taba talks, Amnesty and Human Rights Watch, they both issued opinions, they issued policy statements on the right of return. And both of them stated that the Palestinian refugees and succeeding generations which have maintained genuine links with the land, that they do have the right of return and compensation. So there doesn't seem to me to be any legal ambiguity, at least among the mainstream and respected human rights organizations, about the Palestinian right of return and compensation. Then there comes the issue of the practical implementation of this right, and there it seems to me there has to be negotiations with the burden placed on Israel, that if Israel says it's unable to accommodate a right of return, then Israel has the obligation to propose a settlement such that the Palestinians on their own decide, well, in exchange for this settlement, we're willing to give up the right. But that's the right that Palestinians have to exercise or not exercise. And nobody has the right to deny Palestinians their right under international law. But as I said, that doesn't preclude the possibility that Israel might offer a settlement such that Palestinians say, okay, in exchange for this settlement, we're willing to give up part of the right of return, or that is to say, some will return, some will not. I don't know. I don't want to prejudge the negotiations. What has to be stated, however, at the outset, is that this is a legally mandated right of the Palestinians, which nobody has the right to deprive them of.
What about the question of which issue to tackle first? I mean, for the Palestinians, they want to focus on borders, Saeb Shaath, and Jerusalem al-Quds, but Israel wants to focus on refugees, security, and recognition.
I don't think. Well, do you want me to answer that, or your?
No, Saeb Shaath. I'll get to you in oral frequency. Thank you.
Okay.
This is the whole negotiation was called rightly the blame game, and the right-wing government of Israel just they playing their delaying tactics and putting to the Obama's administration they are under severe coalition political pressures. They cannot do this, otherwise their government going to collapse. Obama's administration, they pretend like they understand what's going on, and actually they are party to what's happening. What the Israelis doing by this is right, and because they don't want to jump on the issue, the important issue of the borders, and this state doesn't have constitution, this state doesn't have any defined borders, and they don't want to define borders. They want to put the Palestinians at the corner to establish for them 4 Bundestans, one in the north of Palestine, which they call the Triangle Galilee area of the Arabs who lives under Israelis control, and 3 Bundestans in the West Bank, which is one near Jenin, one in the middle, one near Hebron, and these things under what they call it autonomous sort of control, militarily and politically under the Israelis' control. That is the one-state solution which the Likud party sees. Actually, they are trying to implement the one-state solution after they get rid of Gaza, and they want to push Gaza to Egypt. That's why Egypt found itself in an awkward position, have to implement sanctions against Gaza, because they don't want Gaza to be pushed at them, and they're going to be blamed for failing the Palestinians' right of establishing their state. They're complicating matters, and the Obama administration knows very well what they're doing right now. Mitchell going in Palestine, they're not to talk about negotiation. Mitchell is preparing Stevie Livni for the next government, because they couldn't deal anymore with this ultra right-wing government, and we will be very interesting watching his meeting with the Arab League ministers and see what they're going to come up. They're going to go back to the same idea of Madrid conference, conference and because they want all the Arabs to recognize Israel and put the brushes. The Arabs entertaining the idea of Steve Livni and the Americans as well, because they want to do some sort of solution to get the land free to play against Iran right now. So let me jump in and get a problem as soon as possible.
Saeb Shaath, let me get Normal Finkelstein in here. If you can please react to Saeb Shaath. He made many points there, one-state solution, and that these talks, they're not there. George Mitchell's not there for negotiations.
Well, I think the important point to keep in mind is that there is no peace process. There has never been a peace process. And for the foreseeable future, there won't be a peace process. That's not just rhetoric. That's what the documentary record, that's what the factual record shows. A rational person, a reasonable person, he or she judges by results. You judge by outcomes. So let's look at the results and the outcomes. The current phase of the so-called peace process is said to have begun with the Oslo Accord in September 1993, the famous White House lawn handshake between Mr. Arafat and Mr. Rabin, with Mr. Clinton presiding. At that time, in September 1993, there were 250,000 illegal Jewish settlers in the occupied Palestinian territories. 17 years later, in 2010, the number is now 500,000. So the number has doubled. According to B'Tselem, the Israeli Information Center for Human Rights in the occupied territories, Israel has annexed 42% of the West Bank for the settlements. So if you look at outcomes, if you look at results, there has not been a peace process, there has been an annexation process. And in fact, the annexation process needs the peace process.
Okay, we appreciate that. We're going to have to end it on that. Thank you very much, author and lecturer there, Normal Finkelstein from New York. I also want to thank author and Middle East affairs expert Saeb Shaath, who joined us from Belfast. And of course, you, the viewer, for watching this. Any questions or comments, do send it to us at newsroom@presstv.ir. From me, Kaveh and the team, it's goodbye.